Hi, and welcome to another Scientology Outside of the Church podcast brought to you by ao-gp.org and the College of Independent Scientology.com. This is season 11, episode 16. The title of this episode is going to be The Problem of Sex. And I am here with Quentin Stroud. This is a two-parter. This is part one. Part two will be later this week. Quentin, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic.
Good. Me too. So,
Excellent.
where do we want to start off on the problem of sex when it comes to independent Scientology and its viewpoint and planet Earth's viewpoint?
Listen, I like sex like the next guy. Okay. I just want to start there. And I, but I want to also say and understand that where we're coming from with this, I think is going to be really important to understand you as a being and understand that how as a being sex has been in pretty much every major religion, every major viewpoint on the world, that sex has been something that people have wrestled with when it comes to one's spiritual well-being, right?
Mhm.
Sex has been something that many philosophies and many religions have wrestled with, and I think that there's a reason why. And when I uh, encountered this particular reference that we're going to be going over, and maybe some others as well, when I encountered these particular references by L. Ron Hubbard, it kind of made it kind of all come to a head and kind of make sense as to, oh, this is why people have a problem with this thing, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So we're going to talk about the problem of sex, and I think this is something worth listening to for those of you who want to hear.
So, what is the problem of sex modern day?
Or do you want to start off with the reference that we're talking about?
Yeah.
You you can read that one.
As far as the pain and sex goes,
Right.
yeah,
Right. So we're,
let's
we're talking about a specific reference here.
see here. And this is from 1982, 26 August 1982. It's an ACO bulletin. He says there are two items in this universe that cause more trouble than many others combined. One is pain, the other is sex. One should know more about these things. They may have applications, but they are used by destructive beings in great volume to cave others in. Despite the false data of Freud, psychologists, psychiatrists, and other criminals, they are not native to a being. They are only artificial wavelengths. They have exact frequencies that can be manufactured. A being or a machine can synthesize either one. Pain becomes a
Oh,
loss.
I want to stop there first.
Okay.
So I think that first little chunk is important because when he starts this thing off, he talks about these things that in this universe that cause more trouble than many others combined. One is pain and the other is sex.
Mhm.
Now, I think this is huge. And when you look around life, when you look around the control of people, when you look around the enslavement of people,
Mhm.
when you look around all this stuff that kind of goes on, you see two things that are used very destructively, he used the word, in order to control people. One is pain. Go back to the whippings and the beatings of slaves. Go back to using torture chambers and torture mechanisms to control people and get people to do
Mhm.
what you want them to do or confess what you want them to confess.
Mhm.
Pain, and the other is sex. And you think about the way sex is used to control and to manipulate, right?
Mhm.
And so when we look at these two things, the thing that really stood out for me here is he said that these are not native to a being. And so when we talk about this from an independent Scientology perspective, we're talking about obviously as walking around and working with these messed physical bodies, right? If you want to have children, if you want to procreate, if you want to do all these things or whatever, sex is a part of all that. But what is it to a being, though? What's the point? What's the point of sex to a being? What's the point of pain to a being that has no nerve endings, no central nervous system to speak of? No, what's the point of pain to a being? So when LRH wrote this reference on sex and pain, or pain and sex, I thought it was really, really powerful the way he kind of went into it, talking about these things as a wavelengths,
Hmm.
not as a not as a something that a being necessarily needs or wants, right?
Right.
Unless they've been conditioned to go down this road as far as pain and as far as sex goes.
Hmm.
And so I just wanted to kind of open the conversation with what we're talking about here. We're talking about pain and sex, particularly the problem of sex, from a being's perspective, and how as we kind of unpack this conversation a little bit more, what does it do to you? What could it do to you as a being that could, send you off the rails?
Yeah, and you also have to take into consideration the axioms that what what is the greatest drive that a Thetan has, and that is to cause and effect.
Yeah. Axiom 10.
So
Hmm.
in so doing and looking at that on this the second dynamic, you're trying to cause an effect. And if you don't cause an effect, you are disgruntled by the fact that you are not causing the effect that you want to cause, depending on where that is on the tone scale. And
There you go.
sex, if you look at where owning bodies, controlling bodies, and all of that is, it's on the bottom right hand side of the tone scale, and it's not very high. And then as you go up the tone scale, you start to sublimate sex for other forms of creation, higher toned and all of that. Now there's other lower toned harmonics where you have sex and games, where it could be strip poker, or it could be you're dressing up, or acting something out, that type of a thing. So you have these other different types of harmonics. So that's another thing. But they all end up being causing an effect. And again, since we've mentioned this, I don't know how many times lately in podcasts,
Mhm.
is in order to play a game, one has to agree to become aberrated.
Mm.
So if you give up your self, you have to give up your self-determinism in order to be the effect of another being, and therein is where you start to go down the scale, the dwindling spiral, if you're not careful. And that's what you see that this society has, to where if advertising doesn't have sex in it, it doesn't work.
Where there's a whole statement in sales called sex sales.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting that when people really take a step back, um whether it be with our children, when your child is growing up, your child is living, a parent knows instinctively to keep their child away from sex.
Hmm.
Isn't that interesting?
Hmm.
Like there's a thing that kind of works in us to say, oh no, you're not going to come near my child with that, right?
Right.
And so but we didn't say, but it's natural, but it's a part of the human experience. It's a blah 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 blah. And yet, when your child comes out, do not come near my child with that stuff. Period.
Hmm. Hmm.
Why is that? Because we know instinctively as beings, we know that sex is low on the vibrational energetic tone scale. We know that sex is low on the tone scale, and that it can come through or can be utilized by destructive beings for destructive ends,
Right.
you see.
Right.
And so go ahead. Mhm.
Well, I was going to say, and you look at all of the controversy around these leaders, and the Jeffrey Epstein thing, and all of that, and Piece and
Mhm.
Eight, and all of that, and it's really freaking dark what
Yeah.
is portrayed as to what happens to children with beings who are aberrated on sex. And I mean, when I say dark, I mean as dark as it gets.
Hmm.
I mean, it's not pretty, and there's been a lot of communication about that as to what's really going on and how pain and sex and children are used to control other individuals once they get them addicted to
Hmm.
that lowest of low orders when it comes to governmental types and politicians and things like that. And that's how far down the scale is. I mean, I don't even want to get into it on the podcast, but I mean, it's
Yeah,
as
yeah.
dark
But
as it
but
gets.
people who know what we're talking about know what we're talking about. And I
Right.
think that if we continue the reference, Illustrate says pain becomes a lock on a being's abhorrence for misalignment of his own electrical flows. It is a lock upon unconsciousness, which shuts off knowingness. He's talking about pain and sex, and in this case, he's talking about how pain becomes this abhorrence of misalignment of his own electrical flows. Again, a being doesn't have a nerve system. You as a spiritual being,
Right.
you
The
as
body.
you, the body has nerve endings. The body has these electrical channels. The being just deals with energy, right? And so the being doesn't feel pain, but can recognize or have an abhorrence for misalignment of his electrical flows, right? And it's a lock upon unconsciousness, which shuts off his knowingness. And so to a being, the worst pain is not know.
Hmm.
To a being, the worst pain is mystery.
Hmm.
To be in total mystery. I don't know what to do. I don't know what's gonna happen. I don't know. That's suffering to a being, you see.
Hmm.
And so why is it that so many people have such a horrible anxiety, so much a horrible feeling when they don't know what's gonna happen, and they don't know where their next paycheck is coming from. They don't know where it's because to a being to not know is painful, you see.
That's right.
And so I want you to understand what LRH was uncovering here when he was kind of pulling out this reference that pain is a lock because it messes up or misaligns the electrical flows of a being. A being don't like what is this? Why can't I operate right? Why can't I move right? Think about your let's go to the body for a second. When you try to walk around and you got a pain in a person has a pain in their knee or a pain in their back and they can't move, your electrical flows are off and it's painful to not be able to flow the way you want to flow as a being. I can't walk, I can't move, I can't function, I can't get around. It's pain, you see.
Hmm.
Well, then he says, sex is a lock on and perversion of the joy of creation, which involves a whole being and expands him. This is so good. But by using just one wavelength, sex, pew, pew, just one wavelength, sex, this can be perverted and he contracts. This is such a powerful reference if y'all get this.
Yeah.
Sex, oh, go ahead, please.
Well, that's okay. It's one of those things where you become sort of myopic on it,
Hmm.
where you you
Yeah,
you're you're stuck on that
so
particular
focused.
wavelength, so focused that's the only thing that you well, that's what myopic is you're only looking at one thing, you're focusing on one wavelength. And
Yeah,
that's what you see in this society is uh you know if it hasn't got titties, I don't want to watch it.
right,
That
right.
kind of thing. I mean, you see
Yeah,
that all the
and
time.
you can fixate on it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But what I think is really powerful here, and I'm going to break this down a little bit because he says it's a lock on and a perversion of the joy of creation, which involves a whole being and expands him. So think about this. When we think about the joy of creation, when you think about the joy as a being, so you are God and you have the ability to create worlds and universes and solar systems and suns and moons and stars, and you're the joy of that, the joy of creation, the joy of expansion, the joy of being, right?
Hmm.
And that involves the whole being and expands him as a joy of creation. But just by using this one little wavelength, sex. Pew, pew. I do it like that because that's all it is, like a little pew. You
Mhm.
had
Yeah.
a little orgasm. Pew. In the grand scheme of the universe, that's what it is. A pew, you know. And this can be perverted, and he contracts because that one little wavelength, which is supposed to be in the body, is the epitome, the climax. That's the word we use. The
Mhm.
climax of the joy of creation. Ain't that something?
Yeah, and that
Of all the power that you are as a being, and your climax is pew.
right, right, is that second to 3 or something, whatever, I mean, however long it is, and then it's like, well, you just spend an hour to get to that point, and it's like, well, okay. Where
Even
if
of
you do
eternity.
yeah, if you do a painting or you create a building or a business or whatever, that is also part of the joy of creation. So, but
Yeah.
the problem lies in where a person becomes so ingrained into that particular wavelength that
Yep.
that's all that exists. And that's something that you see in this society. I mean, you look at Facebook, you look at Instagram and all this stuff and these influencers and the posing and the bathing suits and the this and the that and all of this. And it's all used. I mean, they're called thirst traps.
Mm.
That
Ain't that something?
yeah, and so and it's important to note that LRH says in the axioms that a being chooses to be restimulated on this wavelength.
Of
Chooses.
course.
And that's where everything goes wrong because you know, you could have somebody who's allergic to apples, but yet they still go to an apple farm.
Hmm.
Okay, why are you going to the apple farm if you're allergic to apples? I just can't help myself.
I just love some apples. I
I just
love them
love
apples,
those.
boy.
Yeah, but it makes you break out into hives. I know, but I
But
just
they
can't
so
get enough apples.
pretty.
Yeah, they're
And they're
so
so
pretty. That
red. They're so
beautiful, that
nice.
yeah, that beautiful redness. The smell of those blossoms. Those
Oh my
blossoms.
gosh. Bruh, let me
Right.
tell you.
Right.
Let me,
I
let me
mean,
tell you.
it's funny as an analog to say it like that because
You're
it's
right.
that's literally what it is it's this fixation on that wavelength of those apples.
Right. And so it perverts. Let me be clear. When he does the word perverted, I think the first thing that we come to our mind is something lascivious, something disgusting, something
Yeah.
gross or whatever. But perverted in this sense, he's talking about the being, and he's talking about getting thrown off course, right?
Yeah.
If the idea is being thrown off. Perversion, when something is perverted, I mean vertir, which means to turn, is something being thrown off, right?
Mhm.
And so when he talks about sex as a this can be perverted and he contracts, it's talking about the being can be thrown off and shrunken. And he goes on to the next couple of lines and he says when pain enters a scene, a being withdraws, contracts, and can go unconscious. We know that to be true. When pain comes in, a being will recoil from pain. Ooh, the stove is hot. Ooh, whatever. The being will recoil from pain, withdraws, contracts, and can go unconscious, totally, passing out.
Mhm.
But then it says, when sex enters the scene, a being fixates. And it's interesting. A being fixates and loses power.
Mhm. Mhm.
This is so interesting.
His
When
apples.
sex enters the scene, those apples, right? A being fixates and loses power. Now, what happens when you have your little, what happens when you have your little, pew? Most of the time,
Right.
they go, people be like, oh, and
Right.
when
And
they
then
go
and
back
then
to sleep,
and,
right?
and they pass out.
They pass out.
Right. Those apples, man, they make me sleep after I have them. Well, that's because you have an allergy to them. I mean, it's an analog, but I mean that's the thing, and
Yeah.
it's a way to describe it is once you've experienced that wavelength and that pew, and then you kind of
Hmm.
go, okay, I'm good. I got the monkey off my back. let's see what I can go do that's
Yeah.
constructive. And then you start to your power starts to return and you're like, okay, so where do you want to go for breakfast? Yeah.
Right.
You know that that
Because
kind of
get
thing.
this, because that's really what it's about, right?
Mhm.
It really is about the connection. It's about the beings interconnecting. It's about the beings having a communication line. It's about the beings, even in the Bible, the original translation of the Bible says, Adam knew Eve. Adam knew Eve, which we understand knew, to know your wife in that context was mean to have sex with her. But the idea was that as beings, they would get to know each other. And
Mhm.
their knowingness of each other was climactic. Their knowingness of each other was expansive and huge. Their knowingness of each other was what you really wanted from another being, not their meat. Are you kidding me?
Right. Yeah, it's very low order.
Yeah, yeah. It's a very low order.
Yeah,
He
and
talks about this later in another reference.
yeah, and you see this in people who have eating disorders and stuff like that. You know, I just love to have that steak. I have to have so much steak. You know that,
Mm,
and so they get fixated on this particular wavelength of consuming, you know, meat or whatever it is.
hmm
You know, and so it not only happens with sex, but I mean, a being can focus their attention on anything and get fixated on it. And this is one way, but and it's one of the most prevalent ways for people with beings with bodies.
Well, and again, we're being, a bit tongue in cheek in this conversation about it because obviously, as a human hyphen being, you're gonna have sex, right? Most of us are gonna have sex. So this is not a demonization. Let me be very clear.
No,
This is not a demonization of sex. What we're trying to articulate here is how, as independent Scientologists, knowing how to know, as as independent Scientologists, what we're emphasizing here is that the highest order of that, on the no to mystery scale, the highest order of that is knowingness. It's knowingness is the highest order of a being,
right.
right? Sexingness, right? If you look at the 1953 no to
Way
mystery
down.
scale, is way down there, right? Sex is way down there on the scale. And so, what we're trying to make one mindful of is that what is sex for? What is sex useful for? And what is sex to you as a big, giant being
Mhm.
having these interactions with bodies, right? And so, And so if you understand what we're trying to get over here, you know we're not trying to demonize sex, but we're just trying to help you to understand and appreciate what it is in the grand scheme of things as you as a being. That's all.
Right. And he goes on to say the destructive creatures who do not want people big or reaching, since they are terrified of punishment due to their crimes, invented pain and sex to shrink people and cut their alertness, knowingness, power, and reach. Thus, you see people who are quote unquote experiencing either pain or sex introverting and not producing much. Pain and sex were the
Mhm.
invented tools of degradation. This is how you suck people into bodies by using advertising and movies and porn and
Yeah.
all this
That's
stuff.
what consumerism is. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it's just it's
Consumerism is give me more, give me more.
right, right, because that's what gets their attention, and once you have their attention, you can drive it in any direction that you want.
Anywhere you want.
Right, almost
hmm
from with a body, almost a Pavlovian sort of show me the boobies and then
And you salivate.
right,
Right.
right, and that's it. And he says, believe it or not, a being can be so overwhelmed by either pain or sex, he or she becomes an addict of it. And now this is an important point because at the time, and I'm not trying to cross flows here or anything like that with biology or psychology and independent Scientology. But what happens Pavlovian wise is that people get addicted to chaos. They get addicted to sex because of the dopamine that they get on there, which is the body's reward for giving it what it wants, which is what happens with sex and other addictions is that you get the body goes squirt, thank you. And
Hmm.
that's what he's talking about here. At the time, it hadn't been quote unquote discovered yet. So he says priests
Yeah.
become flagellants and cut themselves to pieces with self whipping. Torturers drool over pain. Lovers are very seldom happy. People do the most irrational things when overcharged with sex, and prostitutes use it as a knowing stock in trade because they know how easy it is to
To
get.
sell.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so it's the oldest profession on the planet because that's how
Hmm.
long this has gone on. He goes on to say combined pain and sex make up the insane Jack the Rippers, who killed only prostitutes, and the whole strange body of sex murder freaks, including Hinckley, the guy that shot Ronald Reagan, and the devotees of late night horror movies. Under the false data of the psychs, who have been on the track for a long time and are the sole cause of decline in this universe, both pain and sex are getting ground in gaining ground in this society and coupled with robbery, which is a hooded companion of both, may very soon make the land a true jungle of crime. And that's
Hmm.
how you see that with drugs and sex, and how those two wavelengths cross over each other because of the dopamine thing. And you get paid in drugs for sex, or you get sex for drugs, or that type of a thing. And your opium dens and all of that in China, uh, thousands of years ago, and sex and all this stuff. So they're not far apart because of the dopamine uh, correlation.
Right. And we understand that now, talking about,
Yeah,
hormones and stuff like that. Yeah.
yeah,
And brain chemistry and stuff. Yeah.
yeah. And what happens, and then you've got cortisol and all that stuff along with it too. Um, you want to take on the next paragraph?
Well, I was gonna, before we go to that, I was gonna
Okay.
say here too that when he talks about the horror movies, I kind of chuckled because this was written in the 80s, right? 82. But
Yeah.
if you remember the horror movies of that time,
Hmm.
like late 70s, early 80s, I remember like one of my first ones was Jason, Friday the 13th, Jason
Hmm.
Voorhees.
Hmm.
And I remember as a kid even watching these little horror movies, and you would always see some girl
Hmm.
running out, boobs hanging, flapping around, screaming,
Hmm.
you know, and they had to always have this girl in these horror movies at the time
Hmm.
because there was this fascination with pain and sex. And
Hmm.
the girl, they were getting it on in the little hut or whatever at Camp Crystal Lake. The teenagers were getting it on, and then Jason came and killed them all and splashed blood everywhere. It was such an interesting thing,
Yeah,
and yet
yeah.
it sold billions.
Yeah, yeah, and people identified with that, and I myself always found it really abhorrent to
Yeah, it
see
was
those
crazy.
two things combined. I'm like, what? What is this? That's like putting gravy on top of hard
Cheesecake. Something.
cheesecake and saying, "Hey, this is good," and that's another thing along with it is sex, eating, and pain. They
Yep.
all are almost right next to each other, and then you see these combinations of foods with sex, and I don't know. For me, it's not a thing, but I just find it really, it's really strange how you saw that in the 80s too, in a lot of the movies where they would combine all these things, and it just didn't make
Yep.
any sense. But like you said, it
It does
indicated to a
now.
lot of, yeah, a lot of people. You're right, and it's just so bizarre how those things combine.
Yeah, and I only again bring this up to understand but by you understanding what's going on, you become less the effect of it, right? And
Mhm.
so
That's
by
the point.
understanding, mhm, by understanding how sex is as a wavelength is being used, you can understand then what might be happening with one's body. You can understand what be happening with one's fixations, if that's a thing. You can understand kind of what's going on with it. And then you could then become the master, what does it say, the captain of your own ship. You become the captain of your own ship. That was a thing in the late 80s with
Are
Jerry Seinfeld,
well,
90s.
yeah, are you the master of your own domain?
Right. Because they were trying to avoid having sex.
Right.
It was
Yeah, they were trying to avoid masturbating and see who could
masturbating.
last the longest. And Kramer goes in, slaps his money down on the counter, and says, "I'm out."
I'm out, right? I'm telling you. So again, this is really important. So LRH goes on to say here, go into an asylum or prison and look at the increasing institutional population and know what you're looking at. In the main, these are pain and sex addicts dedicated to decadent and degraded and no longer capable. They were sent on that route down through the ages by the psychiatrists, and here they are still in the psych's hands. And do they get well or go straight? No. Whether in prisons or insane asylums, they just get worse. And the psychs in both places rub their bloodied hands as they turn their products loose again upon the remaining population. It's no accident. And the stock in trade of psychs are pain and sex. They will even tell you it's natural to steal.
Mhm.
To compound their felony, if this is a if this is, I'm sorry, to compound their felony, if that is possible, they tell you it's the body doing it. This is so interesting. They tell you it's the body doing it. Another crushing big false datum on top of all their other lies. I want to stop here because there's this thought that the body is craving something
Mhm.
or the body is hungry. I think it's so interesting. There's this idea that the body is hungry. You're fiending for it, some people
Mhm.
say, right?
Mhm.
And if you just look at your if you just think of it as a body's thing, then in all essence, it could easily be conquered, right? Because that's what you're here to do.
Mhm.
You, as a spiritual being, you're here upon a conquest of the physical
The
universe.
universe, right?
And so, if it's just the body's craving it, my body, oh, I just need it, you know. If it's just the body's craving it, it could easily be conquered because that's what you're here to do. You're here to control your body. You move it
Mhm.
around, you move it from point A to point B. You know, you get in the shower, you get out the shower, you go to work, you come back from work, you get in the bed, you go to sleep. You handle your body quite well most of the time,
Mhm.
right? And yet, when it comes to something on these levels, pain, sex, when it comes to sex, it's like, oh, your body needs it. Your
Right.
body's doing it.
Mhm.
That's not true.
Mhm.
It's
I
not
just
true.
can't help myself.
Hmm. There's this, and it's a lie. And the reason why it persists is because it's a lie that they're telling you, or the lie to think that the body just needs this. I
Mhm.
want you to understand you are a causative spiritual being
Mhm.
operating a body to communicate and identify with other beings that are operating with bodies. Just communicate, it's just communication via, right?
Mhm.
And you're having this experience. And if you think your body is doing it, then you won't be able to control it on some level
That's right.
because it's something divorced or separated from the being. So you think it was just the body. The body needs it. The body needs it, right? Well, how
Mhm.
do people go? How I should just go here. Well, how does one go 40 days and 40 nights of fasting? How does one do that?
Right.
If it's the body must have.
Mhm.
No,
Mhm.
you can control your body.
Mhm.
It's really interesting. I just want to say that.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's if you have control of it over it, and you're like, well, I need to have sex this many times a day, and you don't put in a control. Well, it's not even say need. You just end up doing it way more than you should. Who's who's in control?
Mm.
Is it you, or is it the body? And if you blame the body, you won't be able to control it, because you have to have some self-discipline on it, so that you, well, because if you can't produce, then you won't be having sex much longer, because you won't have a roof over your head, or whatever. So I mean, it's one of those things that we're not trying to vilify it. We're just saying
Right.
that you have to understand the appropriate source of the compulsion, the drive to do it, and take responsibility for it as well.
And understand the context. Understand that in creating your own universe, because again, as an independent Scientologist, you are self-determined. So there's no shame here. There's
No.
no, none of that. You are a self-determined, free-willed individual. This is the thing, though. When you understand in the creation of your own universe, the creation of your own life, you get to determine what significance, which is something I'm going to talk about a little bit later, what significance sex plays in your universe, right?
Mhm.
And the reason why I said it earlier that we're kind of being very tongue in cheek about it and talking about pew, the little pew that you try to get to, the little pew. I'm doing that in order to help you to appreciate at least where this could fall in the
Right.
significance of your
Right.
whole
Right.
life,
The
in the
priorities.
significance of your whole creation and your whole existence,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And people get obsessed with causing that effect. I need to cause that
Hmm.
effect. I need to cause that effect. And they operate on that their whole lives. And if I can't cause that effect, I'm no good. I have low self-esteem. I have this. I have, and it's all negative, because you have to be willing to receive an effect as well, because if it's one-sided, it's a stuck flow. And that's the thing, is that this whole thing has to be an inflow and an outflow. It can't just be one or the other. Otherwise, it's a stuck flow. And that's where the problem begins, and the obsession begins with it, is you have to balance it out, and you also have to sublimate, because to the degree that you're sublimating is to the degree that you're doing other things above that, as far as causing an effect on the meat body, so to speak.
There you go. I was going to say, explain sublimating.
Sublimating would be, okay, instead of having sex, why don't we create something together beyond that? I mean, have you ever noticed where, when you start getting really creative, even if it's in a second dynamic, and you start getting creative and you start creating other things, your attention comes off of the sex, and it becomes a higher tone. Like, we're going to design a house, or we're going to go out and we're going to look at furniture, or we're going to
Hmm.
we're going to go out and shop for a piece of land to build a farm on, or build a business together and everything. The sex sort of goes into the background, because there's this higher, you're sublimating the sex for a higher
Experience.
version of creativity and experience that has a longer lasting effect. And you're like, wow, look at that, whatever it was that we created as a dynamic duo. And
Hmm.
you see this on the third dynamic as well, is when you get a group and they're all creating something and everything like that, and you go out and you work hard, and you're working 12 hours a day and everything. You don't give a shit about sex, because
Right.
your morale is so high, because your production is there. Production is the basis of morale, and sex tends to fall to the wayside for a few days at least, and stuff like that, until you start to come down the tone scale. And then you're like, well, and you say, well, the body needs this, but it's you that needs this. And so you drop down the tone scale, and then the next day you go back to work and you forget all about it again, because now you're doing
Mm.
something that's much more higher tone, that is sublimating sex for something else. You're exchanging one for the other, and this can go all the way up the tone scale to where you're in games, and you'd much rather play this other game instead of be the effect of electronic wavelengths. That's basically what I'm trying to say.
I got that. Yeah. And I think that was interesting about what you just said too, is that think about it this way. Let's bring it back home to real world application, right? When a couple has sex, which with having a body, that's likely to happen. When a couple has sex and they have a child, they've created a child, right?
Right.
Oftentimes, if the couple's together and the whole bit or whatever, oftentimes sex becomes less and less uh, 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 prominent in the relationship because now we got this child to feed. We got this child to tend to and rear and take care of and raise, right?
Right.
And so, I'm not saying good. I'm not saying it's a good thing necessarily, but what I am saying is that because something else is higher, there's a higher order of creation that has taken place.
Mhm.
This child is now here. Sex, the actual impact of the actual act of sex becomes less and less prioritized because baby's crying, baby got to get eat, we got to take the child to school, we got to,
Right.
and we have to then find time. They say, oh, we got to find time to make love, we got to find time to do it. You got to kind of put it in there sometime, right?
Mhm.
Because it's a natural thing. And that's what I think that you're trying to communicate, that when you're come up higher up the tone scale, when you're operating on a higher wavelength of creation, of creativity, you can sublimate sex, and this then becomes a higher thing that we start to do here. You see,
Right. Right.
and I think it's a beautiful natural progression of a being that okay, I was there. I was doing my thing and I was doing my thing a lot. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Sometimes, a little bit too much, you in college or whatever, and you're doing your thing. And then yet, as you grow up, these are the phrases I'm going to use, as you grow up, as you mature, as you become a bigger being, that seems to be a little bit trivial. It seems to be a little bit immature to go chasing after tail.
Yeah, and that's why you see the honeymoon phase in relationships and stuff like that is you get to a point where okay, we've figured this out, we've been there and we've done that. Now let's sublimate to something else. Whatever
Because it's focus on.
whatever that may be. And
I
that
love
doesn't
you.
mean that doesn't mean that you can't still have a healthy sex life. I'm just saying that
Right.
there's more to life than that wavelength is what I'm trying to say. And you
Yeah.
understand that and you're like, okay, well, there's other games that we can play too, but on whatever occasions, how many nights a week or whatever, date night, I mean, you got to keep it interesting. And that's why as couples age together, they try to make it interesting and spice it up and keep it
Yeah.
new, which
We
is
travel, we see the world, we experience new things, we have new
right.
orgasms of consciousness, we have new conversations and debates, we have other bigger things. I like to call it intellectual intercourse. We have
Yeah.
intellectual intercourse. Ain't that fun? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, and then sometimes it's even better than the sex act itself, in certain circumstances because you were there with this particular person or beings, or even on a third dynamic that you all experienced the successes of going someplace and doing something and creating something together and everything like that, which is sublimation and a harmonic on a different dynamic. So we're not
Of
just
course.
talking about the second dynamic either, because the second dynamic is comprised of two first dynamics that give their first, and the first gives their second dynamic something, their second gives their first dynamic something, as well as their third to their second to their third to their first to their third, which is where is exchanged by dynamics. So it's a domino effect across all of the dynamics in the long run. It's just that the myopicness or the one-sidedness that you get on this wavelength is where things go wrong, especially in a low-tone society that is constantly
Mhm.
making the sex act the center of attention, because
And he
that's how
talks
you
about
get
that. Yep.
people yeah, that's how you get people to do and buy things that you want, which leads us back to How do you control somebody? You lie to them. What's the most important importances? Sex. Sex.
Mm,
Everywhere you
yeah.
go. And if you don't have an electronic device and you're not using electricity, the only sex you're going to see is the animals in the woods doing it or in the farmer's field or that type of the thing. And it's far less restimulative when you don't have that around. Your attention goes towards other things. When you go to a national park and you look at the scenery, are you thinking about sex? No.
Mm,
You're thinking you're up the tone scale on in aesthetics, going, God damn, this is something beautiful. You go to Victoria Falls, for example. Are you thinking about sex? I don't think so. You're thinking about
mm.
aesthetics. But when you look at your wife, your girlfriend, your husband, your boyfriend, whatever, then you think, well, that's aesthetic. And you go, okay, that's aesthetic. And then you get that pew
Yeah.
in your
Well,
mind.
and the sensation, what I think is really interesting is that when you see beauty, just talking about the aesthetic wavelength of beauty anywhere, right? When you see beauty, um, as a being, it it creates an expansion in you. It creates a think about looking over a palatial landscape or going to a beautiful park or going to a beautiful waterfall or something. It expands you as a being.
Yeah,
But when you see beauty in a meat body,
it does the opposite.
it fixates, it
Yes.
contracts, it
Yes.
oh my God, look at that. Hey, bro, hey man, look at her. Oh my
Check it
God,
out.
man,
Check
look
it
at
out. Mhm.
that. And you see construction workers dropping tools and whole
Right.
buildings come tumbling down because a pretty woman walked down the street.
Right.
Are you kidding me?
Right. And that's where it becomes obsessive is
Yeah,
when that wavelength, grabs you by the face and says, "Look at me." And
right. The,
that's
the
what you
the
have to
woman in the red
control.
dress on the
You-
Matrix.
That's right. That's right. I was going to say that a minute ago. And so that's the thing is you have to be aware of that and go, "Okay, this isn't the body, this is me."
Hmm. And,
And
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 and and and what I love about go ahead. I'm sorry.
I
Finish
was going
first.
to say, and you have to keep in mind a thetan is responsible for their own restimulation, whether it's sex or some other thing that is doing them harm or doing them in.
Hmm. So in this last big paragraph here, you want to read that one where they are most
Sure, he says, he goes on to say they're the
the most.
most used tools. Yeah, they are the most used tools in the campaign against beings and furthering the general goal of those creatures whose sole ambition is destruction. The universe does not happen to be either destructive or chaotic, except as such obsessed creeps make it. Statements it is otherwise are just more false data from the same suspect authorities. It fits their purposes to make seem natural what they make artificially. The universe only seems that way to a being because such loathsome psychotics make it seem so, which is what I was saying about, for advertising, as
Hmm.
example. They destroyed every great civilization to date and are hard at work on this one. The one thing they can't stand is the light of truth. So despite their objections, one must turn it on them. Only in its glare do their lies wither. It is the potent weapon that they can't fend off. I mean, that's what destroyed the Roman
Hmm.
Empire was the fixation on the second dynamic. I mean, Nero especially, that's where things really turned. But
Mm,
you also have to look at, and we'll get into this in the next episode, is you have to look at slavery and sex and all of that stuff and how that is a harmonic of this and races and all of that. So all of these things are closely tied together and they're very similar, if not the same aberration. He goes on to say, these facts may not be very palatable, but they could clear up some mysteries for you. For whatever there is a mystery, and both pain and sex have been these for man, there are answers, as both pain and sex could have messed up your life. The above may be some answers you've been looking for. LRH.
hmm. Yeah. I think it's wonderful. And I started this conversation off at the beginning of the podcast by saying, I love sex as much as the next guy, right? Um, and I love it from the perspective of I understand why and how to use it for my own creation of an effect,
Hmm.
right? To create an effect and to be able to receive an effect. And so as you are listening to this podcast, as you're having your experiences in life, and you will, and it's wonderful that you do, um, just understand who you are in all of this. And that's what Scientology is about. That's why we are, as independent Scientologists, trying to um, offer to you and show you and get to you that there is a way to know thyself.
Hmm.
And in knowing yourself, you know how to move through these experiences and retain that knowingness of who you are. You don't lose yourself in it. You don't get lost in it and your eyeballs, the little I'm thinking about the little wolf on the cartoon. Boing, yoing, 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 yoing. Your
Right.
eyeballs popping out your head or whatever. You don't lose yourself in it. And I think that is what to me maintains the beauty of it.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, if you can be a cause over it, be a cause over your own being effect, that's the best way to be. And that's very difficult in today's society, but it can be done. And you don't want to get socked into the body too much. You also are a spiritual being living a human body experience, and balancing those things out is the key point in what it is that you're doing when you're doing it, and for what purpose.
Hmm.
So, for everyone listening to this podcast, this is going to be the end of part one. We'll do part two in a day or two, and we'll move on to the next segments of this wavelength, which I think is going to be pretty controversial because it's something I've been wanting to say for a couple of years that I've seen in independent Scientology. So, for Quentin Stroud and myself, we hope you got a lot out of this. And again, the pain and sex reference is in technical volume. I'm trying to remember which one it is. It's 1980 to 1984. And you can find the reference in there. And you can also find it on our website at ao-gp.org and the Independent College of Independent Scientology.com. And we will see you in a couple of days for part two. Namaste, and we love you. Bye bye.
Peace.